He is in this White House, this totally alone figure without any kind of basic warmth. He functions essentially like an old-time monarch who has married someone for political reasons, as was done, and there was really no pretense of a of a domestic life. He's generally regarded among his staff as post-sexual. Here is a guy in the White House who has nowhere to turn, who has no comfort, who has no warmth, who is alone. Joanna.
Michael, did you just reverse how we introduce ourselves?
I did, because was getting silence from you. I thought perhaps you had forgotten.
I had not forgotten.
That we're doing a podcast.
I had not forgotten, Michael. How could I forget? Because we're going to focus today.
But we have a favorite topic.
We do have a favorite topic. Trump and the women. Trump and the women.
Or I think even in a broader sense, Trump in his personal life. Because that, I mean, we sort of take it for granted that presidents have personal lives, and they certainly put their personal lives to a great extent on display and seem proud of their personal lives. But Trump doesn't. I mean, he doesn't seem to have a personal life. He really doesn't put it on display, or when it is on display, it's on uncomfortable display. And he really is a man who, by all appearance, is alone in the White House. I mean, and that's that kind of weird thing. And I think this has sort of been a theme of his life, to eschew a personal life, that he is entirely a public man. He doesn't need to have anyone to tend to him, to comfort him, to love him, and it is all about being a singular public person. Weird.
Well, and one of the benefits of having a spouse or having a wife, given that it's only been men that have so far occupied the White House, is surely that in the middle of the night, when you are lying there, hopefully weighing up affairs of state, if you can't sleep, you have someone to talk to. But Donald Trump does not, as far as we know, have anybody to talk to, apart from his endless friends on his speed dial. But he doesn't have, as far as we know, anyone intimate to talk to. So what does he do? He takes to Truth Social. And we've spent some time at the Daily Beast chronicling how little he sleeps by the time between his Truth Social posts. We know the average last month was 27 a day, most of which are sent out in the middle of the night. And we understand from previous conversations you've had with people in the White House that he's assumed to be post-sex. So instead of having sex in the middle of the night, which you assume other presidents have done, he is Truth Socialing.
Well, even more importantly, so is in the middle of the night, he remains a public person.
Right, which is a great observation.
Even lying in bed, he is the public man. So, I mean, there are two questions. What's the impact of being so alone? It does have meaning. And how has he, and remember, he's elected with the support of the family values political constituency, gotten away with what surely seems to be a wholly cynical regard for his wives and family.
So, as you say, he's still a public person in the middle of the night. We know this because he's on Truth Social talking to us, talking to his audience, talking to the world. But there's no Melania there very clearly.
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly we know that. I mean, she just made a whole movie about basically not being there. I mean, she is that vacancy and central question mark in this White House. I mean, you can't miss this question mark. She isn't there. She isn't by his side. we went through the 2024 campaign, and she was never there. Not until actually the final week did she make one appearance. Even at the convention, she refused to be at his side. So this was, I think we can safely say this was hostility.
Well, and there was also the moment when she appears by his side in the convention. He looks incredulous that she's turned up. He looks like he's surprised to see her there.
And even then, she's only on the stage with other people. And so prior to this, and this was, a big issue within the campaign, she would not sit in the VIP box next to him. She would only come in to the VIP box when he had left to give his speech.
Right, poor Usha Vance had to sit next to him in the VIP box, and she looked so awkward. And you just thought, what could they have to talk about except J.D. Vance? And of course, I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about J.D. Vance at all.
So he has this he is in this White House, this totally alone figure without any kind of basic basic warmth, um, even the people who the familiar faces are familiar only on a professional basis. I mean, in the first administration, he had Hope Hicks, who really tended to him, and now he has this woman, Natalie Harp. Um, but but he functions essentially like this, like an old time monarch, um, who has married someone for political reasons, as was done, and there was really no pretense of a of a domestic life, and then he's tended to by factotums.
And he has no, as far as we know, sort of real intimates.
Other than the golfing buddies. I mean, and then there's this, Natalie Harp, has become, as Hope Hicks was, this kind of curious person in his life. We don't really understand that relationship. She appears to be hopelessly in love with him, and we've seen a series of letters that she has, cringeworthy letters that she has written him. As you say, I think that he's generally regarded among his staff as post-sexual. I mean, nobody, yeah, certainly there is at least nobody who is whispering, rushing to say, nor whispering that he has a sexual relationship with anyone. Start up your new business now with Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world. And 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Alo Yoga and Skims to brands just getting started. Get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. On the back end, everything lives in one place: inventory, payments, analytics. So you're not stitching together 5 different platforms just to operate. And if you hit any snafus, don't worry. Shopify is always around to share real advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/dailybeast. Go to shopify.com/dailybeast. That's shopify.com/dailybeast.
As Melania, and as we have said on this podcast before, as Melania makes clear in her movie, which is about the 20 days in the run-up to the inauguration, when you get to the inauguration, the one evening you think that a newly inaugurated president might want to have sex with his wife, she makes it very clear that they're going in completely separate directions at the end of the evening.
And let's just be clear. Even in the first administration, they didn't share a bedroom. Matter of fact, and they were the first couple since uh, uh, John and Jacqueline Kennedy not to share a bedroom.
Right. And he doesn't have siblings either around him, right? He has one living sibling, Elizabeth Trump Grau, who worked in banking and has really stayed out of the limelight. You don't see her on the campaign trail. You don't see her on the stage in the White House when he's parading his sort of Camelot-style family. So he seems essentially very alone. All his other siblings have died.
I mean, he obviously has children, but that seems also to be equivocal relationships of people who work for him. And of course, the child that he was theoretically the closest to, who was in the White House, who was subbing in for in the first lady role, really, was Ivanka, who has now very much distanced herself.
Right, and may physically distance herself if she ever gets her island retreat in Cezanne in Albania, which we've mentioned before, and which she bravely swam to from a friend's yacht and then climbed to the top of a sand dune barefoot, Michael, barefoot. These are intrepid people, the Trumps. Anyway.
Well, let's trace how, I mean, tracing this strange personal life here, or strange lack of a personal life. So let's go back to um to Ivana Trump, which at one point in New York history, they were a kind of a, seminal couple.
They were a seminal couple, and of his three wives, she appears to be the most interesting. She grew up in communist Czechoslovakia, and she actually wrote a rather interesting book called Raising Trump, which I was rifling through the other day to look for quotes, and I found one. When she moved to New York, and she was married before Trump, she actually married an Austrian for an Austrian passport, which once she'd finished college in Czechoslovakia, she actually moved to Austria.
Was that a phony marriage?
Yeah, it was totally phony marriage.
That was a green card.
Yeah, the
marriage.
Equivalent of a green card marriage, but it was to an Austrian, so it was to get an Austrian passport. So her background was growing up in really communist Czechoslovakia. They really had very little access to the Western world, but her escape, as many people's escape, was sport, ironically, thinking about UFC and our conversation about Donald Trump being interested in sport. And she was a good swimmer and she was a good skier, and she was given the opportunity to start doing both at a higher level when she was at school. She ended up choosing skiing, and she basically became part of the junior Olympic team, which gave her the opportunity to travel abroad. And she discusses in the book what it's like going away and just, eye-opening to go from the sort of black and white of communist Czechoslovakia to the colors of Western Europe where she was competing. And then she would come back and she would always be debriefed by the police who wanted to know who she talked to, and was she in fact going to be a defection threat? Would she embarrass them by defecting? And she soon realized that the way to get them on side and to make the police interviews much shorter was just to bring them either fruit or pantyhose for their girlfriends or cigarettes. So she learned very quickly how to do that. But there's a telling anecdote.
And she's not saying in this book, as I recall, that she actually was a enthusiastic informer.
No, she was just saying this was part of doing business and the way to cut the interviews short.
Right. And I'm saying that she was likely an enthusiast.
Oh, you are. I actually came away from the book feeling a bit more sympathetic to her than.
Well, that's why people write these books.
Fair, totally fair, Michael. And of course, as you said recently when we were discussing Graham Plattner, you should be skeptical of everybody, which is a good one. You shouldn't just believe women. You should be skeptical of all.
I think, in this kind of situation and where she came from, you really had to be an enthusiastic informer or you got in trouble.
Right. And there's
And it's just in just to see this as a background against, the curious thing about Trump getting involved with Eastern European women, women who have had this complicated immigration history and who have come out of cultures that were not free.
Well, cultures that weren't free and also cultures that were deprived. So both Melania and Ivana, I'm sure, felt very grateful to Donald Trump
Yes,
for
good
the
point. Good
opportunity,
point.
right? To have access to everything that he had access to. But that there's an annex. So Ivana eventually leaves Czechoslovakia. She has a fake marriage, gets an Austrian passport, but she also has what she describes as the sort of love affair of her life with a man who then gets killed in a car accident. And it's unclear quite what happens with the accident. They're supposed to be meeting on a Friday night for a weekend, and he never shows. And then she learns he's been killed in a car accident. Anyway, she then eventually moves to Vienna and gets out from Vienna to Canada, where she has relatives, and then on a modeling trip is sent to New York. But there's an interesting.
Oh, she's a model also, which is another Trump theme,
Yes,
obviously.
when she goes, she's modeled in Czechoslovakia, and when she's in Canada, she claims she gets scouted as a model when she's at a shopping center. But there was just one quote that I found interesting, and to your point, it goes to this sense of two of his wives having grown up in a culture where they were used to being watched. And she's offered the opportunity to model in a fashion show for Dennis Basso, who's a famous fur designer in New York. So she's asked if she's not afraid of being attacked by PETA. She's asked if she's not afraid of what the press will say if she's seen wearing a lavish sable coat, which is what Dennis Basso wants her to wear. And she says, "No, I'm not afraid of the press," I said. "I was raised in communist Czechoslovakia. The secret police watched us constantly. We were told what to eat, where to work, how to think. I came to America to experience freedom and opportunity. I'm going to wear what I want to wear, and nobody is going to tell me otherwise." So that gives you a slight sense of who she wants us to think she was.
And she was certainly, her profile in New York, and we're talking, so they got married in 1977, I believe, but this is kind of an 80s New York story.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a portrait, and I think this was a cultivated portrait of naked ambition. So she matched him. Um, I mean, he was clearly nakedly ambitious. Was she or not? I mean, she raised children. So she was in fact spent a great deal of time at home where he did not. But that was the persona that she was side by side with him in many of his projects, the Plaza Hotel notably.
Well, she has a description of what she does, and there is a sort of notable description of her giving the children their breakfast in the morning, and then she would take a helicopter and fly to Atlantic City to oversee some of the casinos there. But she says, "During my 14-year marriage to Donald, I designed the interiors of the Grand Hyatt Hotel and Trump Tower, was president and CEO of Trump Castle, the only woman in the top position at any casino in the world that I know of, and president and CEO of the Plaza Hotel, winning the prestigious Hotelier of the Year award in 1990. I wrote 3
Oy.
international bestsellers, made tens of millions selling House of Ivana clothes, fragrances and jewelries on HSN Tampa, QVC London, and TSC Canada. No matter how busy I was, I had breakfast with my children every day. I sat with them at dinner every night, and I helped them with their homework. Bracket, I love algebra, before going out in a Versace gown to a rubber chicken charity event. So she's every bit as ambitious as him.
And mostly going out without her husband. And so, this begins this other theme of Donald Trump is never at home, he's never with his family, he is out all of the time. And this is back to that 80s moment. I mean, and I used to literally every time I went out, there would be Donald Trump, certainly not with his wife, and certainly on the lookout for other women. I mean, it was like a weird thing to see him, that the way he looked up and down everybody, just as a shark on the
I
hunt.
can't imagine you ever being at a social event that Donald Trump would be at, because I can't imagine you were hanging out at Studio 54, but perhaps I'm wrong, were you? Where did you come across him? What sort of rooms?
He would have been at I mean, these were not such glamorous events. He would have been at every promotional event in New York. Um, so whatever the opening was for, whatever the and I'm sure he did many, many a night. So it wasn't as though he's living an exclusive life. He's just living a life in public. See me, see me, see me, see me. So wherever there is press, wherever there is Page Six, wherever there again, all of these promotional occasions in which the press was called. That's why the press is there, because it's been arranged. That's why Donald Trump is there, because he's been alerted that the press was there.
So just this sense of ubiquity that wherever you turned, there was Donald Trump, which of course is him beginning to build his brand, which, as we know what happens, how the story ends.
Yeah, and then this is also, the 1980s, so that, Jeffrey Epstein begins to enter that picture at this point, and Jeffrey Epstein becomes part and parcel of Donald Trump's lack of a personal and domestic life. I mean, in a sense, Epstein represents the inverse of that. Um, and there was a lot of, Epstein would talk about Trump's marriage, actually all of Trump's marriages, with an incredible disdain and haughtiness that and I think the affect was Epstein was certainly not gonna get married because he was honest about his desires and interests, and Trump was a phony about it, but at the same time maintained the same desires and interests as Epstein. And there was a moment I remember Epstein said that Trump complained that Ivana was past her sell-by date, but still wanted to have sex, and that's why he had to stay out of the house. Lovely guy,
Oh, goodness. Well, they get divorced after 14 years, right?
which is a major story in New York. They have a big fight over their prenup, and, it's a huge one of the first big divorce battles that I remember in my time in New York. You couldn't avoid it.
And at one point, she accuses him of rape, which she later withdraws that claim.
Right. I mean, it seems like I mean, it was a horrible breakup. I mean, we saw it and it played out, and I can't help think that it played out because he wanted it to play out this way on the front of the New York tabloids.
What was it in it for him that it played out that way?
Fame,
Fame,
just
just
fame and
attention,
attention.
attention.
At that point, remember, he certainly was not running for president. He was running to be the most famous playboy in New York.
And of course, they get divorced because he's now with Marla Maples, another
Yeah, and
model.
he's been with Marla. I mean, I think he's been with countless people, but Marla is the designated bid on the side, which begins in the 1980s. And Marla Maples is another model actress.
She's the American of the three.
Right, exactly. And then I think the dates are, I think the marriage with to Ivana, it starts to break down in the, late 80s. And the divorce happens in 1992, I believe. But already Marla is in position. And Marla seems to be a kind of, also, a woman, a girl who's out on the town, a party girl. That was almost a kind of a category in the 1980s and 1990s.
Right, and against the background of this, we have he owns a modeling agency, he owns Miss Universe, as do many of his friends, Paolo Zampoli, Jean-Luc Brunel, who will later die of suicide in a jail cell, accused of the same things that Jeffrey Epstein was accused of. So this is the sort of somewhat seedy, well, very seedy background.
The model, this stuff I think happens a little after this. I mean, it really, the bankruptcy, his financial troubles happen in the early 90s. And then he looks for other things, that aren't so expensive, like the model business. But yeah, I mean, very, very much the model business. He's marrying models, going out with models, and then into the model business. And again, you can look at this. This is complete lack of domesticity and intimacy. It's just everything, even it's all a public act.
Right.
And then a public business.
So it's a photo opportunity to have children and a wife. And then he has, as you describe her, his bit on the side. And then Marla Maples gets pregnant.
So the divorce is in 1992.
He divorces Ivana and is thrilled to be free, right? To patrol the streets of New York.
But then immediately Marla Maples gets pregnant, or tells him that she is pregnant. And Jeffrey Epstein comes back in at this point to say he doesn't believe her, and he makes a bet with Trump. I'll give you a truckload of baby food, I think the bet was, if she is pregnant. And she's just trying to trap you, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, it actually turns out that she is actually pregnant, which then becomes a whole different crisis. What it indicates is that that's where these guys live. They certainly don't live in the world of women. They live in the world of men. And I don't think that, and I can imagine that Trump was not happy to suddenly have to get married again. And he's just gotten out of this marriage, and something it was not easy for him to get out of, and now suddenly he finds himself in a new marriage. Now the interesting thing is, I mean, Marla Maples may be pregnant, but he didn't have to marry her. But he does, because it's another thing about Trump, that he's very much in a 50s and 60s cultural mindset, still is. And, he has to do it. I have to get married.
Although I think he says at one point the reason he decided to get married, not mentioning that Marla was pregnant, was because of the Long Island Railroad. Do you remember there was a mass shooting? And he said it made him realize how life was short, and so he wanted to get remarried.
Didn't we recently, in J.D. Vance's book, he said he was going to have a fourth child because of Charlie
Yes,
Kirk's,
because of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so this must just be, maybe this is, just the kind of thing that AI produces.
Or maybe it's the sort of thing that people think after they've been close to a shooting and realized how horrible and violent it is, and that life is worth living and pursuing, and love is at the center of it.
Not these guys.
Not Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump gets married because he has to. He is one of that generation. Why did you get married? I had to.
And then he has the baby called Tiffany because he's got the rights to build above the Tiffany store on Fifth Avenue, right? He's got the air rights, I think, to build above Tiffany with Trump Tower. And so he calls the baby Tiffany.
Jesus, that's a real sentimental heart.
Yeah, Tiffany must be thrilled.
But then understand, so he has this, I mean, this domestic life is I'm sure actually is a sham, but certainly what it is just a corner of his life. His life is a public life. His life is beauty pageants. His life is dating models. During this period, for instance, as he marries Marla Maples, he's sharing a girlfriend with Jeffrey Epstein. It is he does there is no room in his world for domesticity. He doesn't want it. There's no room for intimacy, as in being deeply connected to another person.
Right, or self-reflection with another person. And I've certainly read that Marla Maples, and I've certainly talked to people who said Marla Maples had no idea what she was in for when she married him, and the sort of the Trump family, and Ivana Trump hated Marla Maples because of the infidelity and never forgave her, whereas she forgave Donald, she says.
And then Marla Maples has an affair. And I don't know if she admits to this, but he finds her with his bodyguard, who he then fires, and then he divorces Marla. And within the Trump circle, this is one of the things that they actually continue to, one of the few things that they secretly chortle about.
That Marla had an affair with one of Donald Trump's bodyguards.
Exactly.
Was this at Mar-a-Lago?
Good question. And I think he found them under, as I recall the story, under a lifeguard chair. So maybe it was in Florida, but maybe it was somewhere else. I think this was in 1996. This marriage did not last very long.
The marriage doesn't last long, and then he's back on the market.
This then becomes, in the second half of the 90s, the peak model era of in Trump's life. And he leaves quite a record of his anti-domestic, playboy, totally kind of despicable life. And he does this actually most often on the Howard Stern show. So these clips, which are available for anybody, I mean, he is the narrator of his own debauched life.
By the way, your daughter,
she's beautiful.
Can I say this? A piece of ass.
Yeah.
Some of these foreign girls, Mr. Trump, in my country, we say hello with vagina. And
well, you could also say, as the owner of the pageant, it's your obligation to do that.
So you have done that. Now,
I'll tell you the funniest is that I'll go backstage before a show.
Yes.
And everyone's getting dressed and ready and everything else. And, no men are anywhere. And I'm allowed to go in because I'm the owner of the pageant, and therefore I'm inspecting it. I'm inspecting. I want to make sure that
like
everything is good.
You're there.
Yeah, the dress. Is everyone okay? They're standing there with no clothes. Is everybody okay? And you see these incredible-looking women. And so I sort of get away with things like that.
So we hear some clips there, Michael, of Trump saying things which, again, for attention. Really strange things to say for a man, and yet they got him attention and sort of set him up to be the performer that he becomes on The Apprentice eventually.
Yeah, no, and part of that thing, part of his persona, part of that shtick is all about, I am not a domestic guy. Marriage is a pretense or a fiction. I'm a guy who's out with the most beautiful girls in the world, and this is always a major thing with him, to be with the most beautiful girls in the world. That's the point of life. That's success. If you're if you made a lot of money, but you have an ugly wife, then you failed.
Which he uses against Ted Cruz famously when Ted Cruz is a candidate for leader of the Republican Party. When he's running for president, he goes after Heidi Cruz and just says, she's really, really frumpy and he's thoroughly unpleasant. And of course, Ted Cruz promises that he'll never support Donald Trump. And then lo and behold, he elbows his wife out of the way and is frantically supporting Donald Trump.
No, I mean, it's a very clear thing. What kind of woman are you with? What kind of woman are you married to? And always a commentary on that.
Which is interesting that he chose Mike Pence as his vice president, because Mike Pence comes with Mother Pence, who, just again, I can't imagine what Mother Pence and Donald Trump had to talk about apart from Mike Pence. But, although maybe I've always wondered why Mike Pence wasn't allowed to be in the room with a woman on his own if Mother Pence wasn't there. Is that about Mike Pence losing control because he's got an out of control libido, which seems unlikely, but who knows? Or is it because women find Mike Pence so attractive that they're going to throw themselves at him? I've always found that mysterious.
Completely mysterious. And they would make fun of this. Everybody in the White House would make fun of Pence and Mother Pence. And Trump especially.
I'm sorry to laugh because I like Karen Pence because she refused to shake Trump's hand at Jimmy Carter's funeral, but it's such a strange relationship. Mother Pence, who had to be in the room with Mike Pence in case goodness knows what happened.
Goodness knows, Jesus.
Anyway, Trump did not marry someone that he was calling mother. He married Melania, wife number 3, who's not in evidence, and who we've spent a lot of time talking about, who essentially, as you have always said, remains unknowable. She's a mysterious figure. She looks mysterious. She looks a bit like a cat. The surgery that she's had done makes her look a little cat-like, and of course she's very elegant. Of his 3 wives, she's the most elegant.
And he is, to understand that. So she's a model. She's part of this model circle. That is most of his social life at this point in the late 90s is in the model circle, which is to say with models, with the men who supply models. Jeffrey Epstein, obviously a major figure here. And then he has this, Melania comes into the picture, and it's very important to him that she's a supermodel. Supermodel is a kind of, that has become the term of art for the ultimate woman. So she has to be a supermodel. The problem here is that she's not a supermodel. She's actually a kind of not all that successful of a model. So it is Donald Trump who turns her into a supermodel by pronouncing her a supermodel, and then setting her up with the accoutrements of being a supermodel without her ever being actually a supermodel.
And I wonder if that's why she's now so invested in doing things like the movie and her book, because she wants to reclaim something that she never really had, which is the status of being a supermodel.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's part of it. I'm sure it's also part of this. Everybody else in the Trump family is in on the grift. Why isn't she getting something here? And again, because she lives a separate life from Donald Trump, she sees this as she needs she has a separate life, and she needs to support a separate life.
Right. And again, she's not a domestic goddess. She's never pretended to be a domestic goddess. There's no evidence whatsoever that she is, but she produces him a son, the 5th of his children, Baron Trump.
Yeah, and she seems to be an attentive, honorable, good mother, but separate from Donald Trump, and separate from a domestic arrangement with the father of her
Which is
child.
how Ivana Trump describes herself as a parent, that this was completely separate to Donald. Donald had no input. She describes saying, I am going to tell you where they go to school. Ivanka's going to Chapin. The boys are going here. And he was like, fine, fine. He wanted no decision-making responsibilities. And as I mentioned earlier, Ivana basically hands the children fully formed over to him at the age of 18, which is when he begins to take an interest. And that apparently seems to be the case with Barron. And again, in the Melania, the movie, they have a conversation about Barron where it's very clear that they don't talk about him very often together, and that Trump is talking about him as if he really doesn't spend very much time with him at all.
No, and remember, these are the children become employees. This is very. I mean, they become actually employees. He supports them. He writes the checks. They do the work. It's kind of like an old-fashioned family business. It's really. I mean, there's so much about Donald Trump that seems like living above the store, and everybody has to pitch in and go to work, and he rather treats it like that. The other modern arrangement, the arrangement that people have with their children now, to see them as something other than functional presence in their lives, is not the relationship he has. I mean, you never get a sense that he enjoyment takes enjoyment from his children. That conversation that I've described before, of him saying to people, Don Jr., I wish I could take my name back.
Right. And also, yet that's very, it's counter to the enormous photos of them, the sort of campaign photos, the presidential photos of this burgeoning family. I mean, his kids go on to have lots of kids. I think Don Jr. does he have 5 kids? So when you see them en masse, they look very powerful, and you have no sense of the, I'm sure, internecine war between them.
It's not really a war. It's just a wall. They have a particular thing, and there's no sense within that of a family, of a fight going on because there's lots of emotion here. It rather is, no, you know where you stand. And if you try to take more of that, that's going to be, I'm not even sure you think about taking more of that. You're not going to get more. Donald Trump is what he is.
And yet he's perceived by his evangelical base and by, the conservative part of the Republican Party, and by MAGA, as the ultimate family man, a man who has no domesticity.
Do you think that's true because they kind of believe it? Because this idea of, because of the photographs, because they look, pretty good, because Melania is a good-looking woman, because Ivanka is a good-looking woman. They actually look kind of the same. Same doctors, no doubt. But
Well, same hair. I mean, very similar hair. I think, they look like a family that people would envy.
I mean, I understand. Okay, the leaders of the evangelical movement make a basic Faustian deal. Donald Trump is an immoral so and so, but he's going to give us what we want, so we do the deal. But what about all of those other people in the evangelical Christian constituency? Don't they say, "Hey, what a minute, God, this guy is a dog."
Well, and a man who's been dogged with, I think, more than 25 accusations of sex abuse, sex assault at this point. And And at this point, E. Jean Carroll is still going through the courts with him as the sole person who's actually taken him on in court and managed to win her cases against him for assaulting her in the changing room at Bergdorf Goodman. So a very complicated and unpleasant relationship with women, 3 marriages. His third wife clearly doesn't like him. His first wife accused him of rape in their initial divorce arguments, which she then recanted on, and Marla Maples.
Couldn't get away soon enough.
Right.
So let's get back to the politics of this all, or the good of the nation. I mean, here is a guy in the White House who has nowhere to turn, who has no comfort, who has no warmth, who is alone. What does that?
And
I
doesn't
don't know.
appear to have a best friend either. I mean, when he was tooling around with Jeffrey Epstein and they were hunting for women in Atlantic City, which they used to do together, at least perhaps you could say maybe both of them were sociopaths, but they had each other. But he
I
doesn't
often
have
think
anybody.
that for each of them, that relationship was the closest relationship they've ever had in their lives.
Well, how does this impact it? It impacts everybody because he's lying there alone at night when his, colleagues are trying to get some sleep, truth socialing in the middle of the night, not sleeping properly, not having
in
any
his own,
intimacy.
and you have to say, I mean, let's not go psychoanalyze too much, although that is really our purpose here. But the that certain how does that emptiness relate to that rage, that need to fill the space with his own monologizing on a constant basis, the need to always be right and to have people around him confirm that he is always right, and to have the people around him who have no other function but to be sycophants and to bend to him and to agree with him.
And to always be the center of attention. The world's attention at this point. Oh, Michael, it's always interesting to discuss this stuff because it's essential to how someone lives their life and essential to understanding them. What is their domestic support? I mean, the fact that he eats burgers, the fact that he eats junk food all the time. Also, he's not someone that anyone has ever made a cottage pie for. He's not someone that is moved by the scent of a roast chicken on a Sunday lunch because he's eating at the carvery at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, nobody's having home cooking. I see your wife on her wonderful newsletter, Our Amagansett House, and from time to time she writes out the menu of what you and your family are going to be eating that week. No one is doing that for Donald Trump because he's only eating either at Mar-a-Lago or he's eating fast food that the chefs at the White House produce for him.
It's extraordinary. And just to go back to what actually, this is highly relevant to what we are doing here, that it's interesting how all presidents and the comfort they take and the family lives that frustrate them or sustain them. But Donald Trump in particularly, because of the way he operates as the president, which is it is a government of one. It is all about what comes into his head. It is all about what he wants, what he thinks, the stray facts he's absorbed, and everybody else is at most a bit player. So that what is going, the life he leads has an immediate effect on all of us.
And I suspect if you asked him, he would think that domestic life, in as much as he understands it or does think about it, and perhaps he doesn't, is somehow a weakness, that the need for a domestic life, the need for someone that you can talk to have someone to tell things to and help process the day, is actually a weakness. That he doesn't need that. He doesn't need to tell anybody his insecurities or his anxieties because perhaps he thinks he just doesn't have any. He obviously has them. They just play out in different ways.
No, and always women are accoutrements here. He does this thing when he's with, these old rich guys who he hangs out with, of always of a great proportion of them, if not all of them, have younger wives, of which he always makes a point of, always points this out. Now, the curious thing about them is that many of these guys are so old that that the younger wives are also now pretty old.
Well, it's fascinating. No, the wives are a reflection on him, right? He wants a model wife because it's a reflection on him, because everything is a reflection on him. Well, Michael, we could talk about this indefinitely. I find it fascinating that we have a president who appears to have no one to confide in. But as you say, he doesn't think he needs it. He is a government of one. If you have been, thank you for joining us. We will be back with our next episode of Inside Trump's Head. Michael, do you want to thank our team?
Ryan, Rachel, Heather, Neil, John, thank you as always.
So the good news is we have so many B-Beast tier members now. There are too many names to read out, and we really appreciate your support.